So my first kind of introduction into OT was working in a centre with children with autism, working with kind of educators and educator assistants. What we did was a little bit of a program where 3 days a week we would have about 6 kind of 2 to 5-year-old children with autism come into our centre. We'd have the full day there and we'd be really kind of delivering early intervention. For me, it was a big, steep learning curve. There was lots of things that I learned, lots of things that I learned from other educators. And so today I just really kind of want us to talk about some of the strategies that we use to support children with behaviour difficulties or on the spectrum. It doesn't have to necessarily be kids on the spectrum because other children present with different difficulties or they might be on their way to getting a diagnosis, but really about what we learnt and what we could give to the future kind of educators about how do we best support them, how do we interact with them, and how do we manage some complex situations. How many people do you think in Australia have ASD? So my answer is 1 in a number. What do you guys think?
4 diagnosis.
Yeah.
4 and 10, I'll throw it just to
Yeah.
keep it forward.
That's a good one, yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts? It's a tricky one. And I guess the other thing that I think is important to think about when we're thinking about kids on the spectrum is how many times more likely are males to be on the spectrum than females? Because I think it's important to consider. So how many do you think? Do you guys know that one?
More boys.
Many more, yeah.
Yeah.
More boys.
Yeah.
Twice as much as
Yeah, so
Yeah.
actually it's 4 times more
times, wow.
likely. And 1 in 150.
Wow.
So I guess that's a really good reflection, I think, too, because I guess I think you picked up a really good point there, how many have been diagnosed. As we're kind of progressing into understanding ASD, we're seeing people diagnoses increase. And I think a really interesting reflection for me is that I've actually seen some parents kind of talk to people about what they've been experiencing as well, and maybe that they were experiencing challenges too. So males are 4 times more likely, but I guess it's also important to think about females on the spectrum too, because I guess when I think about kids on the spectrum, I think that girls sometimes slip under the radar a little bit there. So just because boys are more likely than girls to get ASD doesn't mean girls don't, and doesn't mean that we have to keep an eye out for them as well. The Australian Childhood Education Care Quality Authority has kind of brought out some standards and some information there, and one of them is about supporting children to regulate their own behaviour. So this is something that I kind of want us to think about a little bit today, about how can we kind of implement that, how do we make this practical as well. So I guess they're talking about respectful relationships with a child, and I guess also helping those children to build respectful relationships with educators as well as other students and peers as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about my friend Oliver today. Oliver is a real young person that I worked with, but obviously not called Oliver, where I was working with an early childhood centre to kind of support this young man. In this scenario, he was kicking and screaming, but in real life, he was spitting, kicking and throwing things. And I think it can be really, really tricky with a young boy who spits as much as he did. He was probably one of the most complex kids I've ever worked with. So here, Oliver is a 4-year-old boy who has ASD and has begun kicking and screaming after being asked to pack away his trays before going to morning tea. In the real case, it was a marble maze. My friend that I was working with was obsessed with marble mazes and really struggled to pack that away. So I guess I want us to think about maybe what are some of the skills he's lagging. So I've set that one up for us today. So I think I can see that he has difficulties transitioning, maybe some difficulties expressing his concerns, his needs and his thoughts. Also managing emotions when we're frustrated. I think this is sometimes we all struggle. Don't get me wrong, I'm on that too. But I guess when you're a young person or a child, sometimes your reactions are much bigger than those that are adults. And I think this is another one that's important to think about, maybe difficulties shifting from the original plan or idea. And so I guess what I'm hoping for us to talk about now is what do you think are some of the expectations we might have for my friend Oliver? Whether they're right or wrong, what are we expecting him to be able to do?
Follow instructions.
Yeah, beautiful. Follow instructions. Anything else?
express himself.
Yeah. Tell us what's going on. Yeah.
And conform with everyone else, like go wanting to.
Follow a plan. Yeah. And transition. And I think those are fair expectations. Those are ones we expect on everyone. But I guess this helps us think about what are our expectations, what are his lagging skills, and how do we meet them? How do we build his lagging skills and develop them? But how might we pause our expectations or be a little bit flexible? Because right now there's an overlap and there's nothing we can do. We've hit a crisis point, and developing skills is our goal, is our long-term goal. How do we teach that? But how do we look at our expectations to see that this little boy Oliver can have some success? So that's what we'll be kind of talking a little bit through. So we'll just talk a little bit now about some strategies. So when we're teaching kids in early years, what strategies do you guys use to teach skills?
Role modelling.
Perfect.
Oh,
Oh, jeez. Love it. Yeah. Anything else?
Repetition.
Yeah. Any other?
Visuals.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else?
Opportunities, giving them opportunities.
Yeah.
And relating their interests to it.
Lovely. Lovely. And I think that's a really important one, particularly for someone like Oliver. People can get a little bit fearful for kids' interests. They get a little bit concerned that if they bring something with trains on it, is it going to derail his day? But I think it's really important to know that's what he's interested in. How can I incorporate that into some other activities that might not be so pleasurable for him? That's beautiful. Yeah, so I guess what we can talk about is just a few tools, and some of this stuff probably won't be new to you, and some of it might be just a nice little refresher, but to put it into kind of the context of Oliver. So I guess a big thing that we use with young children is stories. So we read them beautiful picture books and stories, and a lot of the time the stories that we read them have beautiful messages about how to be a person, what do we want in a child, what are some great things that we can do to interact with others. At times, kids on the spectrum can struggle a little bit to integrate that message because sometimes it's theoretical characters or it's a little bit more philosophical. So that's when we can use things like social stories or social narratives to make them really specific. So this is how we teach them what do we do and what do we expect. There's a few different ways we can do this. This one's obviously a cartoon one about packing away, but we can use real pictures of the young child packing away. But really, if we go back to that cross, it's talking about our expectations and it's talking about the skills we expect, and we're making it nice and clear for them. Another way we can talk about it, which I think a lot of you guys discuss now, is making your expectations clear. So I guess for someone like Oliver, does he know what's happening today? Does he have a visual schedule? And I think the tricky thing is, have you been using it? So I was big for having my visual schedule up on our wall, but did I talk through it? No. I said, oh, it's up here. You know that we have trains, we have morning tea, then we have something else. But it's really important to go back in and check on that and keep reminding him, all right, remember, we've got trains, then we pack away, then we've got morning tea, then we've got outside activities here. I think this is something that early childhood do great, is developing those familiar pack away routines, whether they have pack away songs, whether they've got a countdown, whether there's something in the environment that's giving them an extra cue that packing away is coming. I think another thing to think critically about is how do we use pre-warnings? So for some students, giving them a timer or giving them some reminders can cause anxiety, but for other students it can ease anxiety. And you guys are the best people to know that because you know that child. But whether for Oliver, whether we gave him a 10-minute warning, came back and checked in at 5 minutes, and maybe another 2-minute warning there. I think you nailed it, making those expectations clear. What do we expect when we're packing away? How do we expect a student to behave? He may not be able to know that yet or be able to manage that yet, but at least we've made it clear to him. Have you checked to understand? So when we're doing, particularly for things like interests, if they've got their trains there, have we checked that he's heard us? Has he registered that it's a 10-minute warning? Has he registered it's a 5-minute warning? And providing choices. And I guess that's where we become a little bit more flexible. And I think once again, something that most of us do really great. So do you want 1 more minute of trains or do you want 3 more minutes of trains? Do you want, it's both, they're both a small amount of time, but they've got a bit of a choice there. Which train do you want to take while we move to morning tea? Things like that, giving a little bit more choice there. I think a fantastic one that most of you guys said is modelling. I think it's really important to not just model how to pack away, but also to model how we manage emotions. So I think this is a big thing that we sometimes forget to do. Sorry, another VIP then.
We're still just gonna try and climb it.
Yeah, beautiful. So modelling what we're thinking and how we're managing our own behaviours. Because I think a big one for children on the spectrum is that they model. Sometimes they model the wrong thing or the inappropriate behaviours from peers. So how as an adult do we show positive modelling and positive self-regulation or emotions? So today I'm feeling a little bit grumpy, so I'm going to have my water and I'm going to go for a walk and I'm going to come back. Or when we're packing away trains today, I'm disappointed. I wanted to keep playing trains today, but I know it's morning tea time, so I'm going to take my favourite train to meet with me to morning tea. And it's showing them how do we regulate, because it might be quite easy for us to know how to do it, but it might not be so clear for them. This is something that I think goes hand in hand, and I can send you guys this one as well, because this is something we use a lot. It's got a big fancy name, but it's something that's quite innate to most of us that work with children, but maybe something that we might assume knowledge for a new person starting to work in this area. Assistance do you give? That's just that just right amount of support that promotes independence, but also gives them a sense of achievement. When we see this one, we could start with giving lots of physical assistance, so kind of hand over hand modelling and working our way down. But sometimes I really like to start with independent, so seeing if they can do it on their own and then slowly grading up my help. So we've got indirect prompts, which might be with the trains out, oh, which train should we put in first? Kind of getting that attention to kind of go, this is what our expectation is, how are we going to get there? Then with a kind of direct point, put the train in. Then things like a model, oh, I'm putting my train in, now you put your train in. A full model, getting his hand and kind of putting it in. Or then physical assistant, where we're really just putting them in together. Something that I think we all quite use, but sometimes we can jump straight up to physical assistance to avoid that big overlap. But are we teaching those skills then, I think is an important question to ask. I think the most important thing that I learned, and I think is fantastic about early childhood, is that you build connections with the young people that you work with. You pick their interests and you roll with it. I think playfulness is the entryway and also the kind of way to manage those behaviours as well. If you've got that beautiful relationship with that child where you know what he's interested in and you delight in that too, they're going to be more likely to kind of manage those challenging behaviours with you. They're going to jump on your team because they know that you're part of their team too. Playfulness can be a really great way to kind of distract or diffuse in those tricky situations. If you know he likes trains, can you drive your train to the lunchbox area? Can you pick a train? Can you line them up and then crash them in? How do you make packing away fun? I think it can be a little bit tricky sometimes with our kids on the spectrum. Sometimes they lack skills in playing. So they might be in the corner with their car rolling it back and forth. They might be kind of spinning a wheel and you often go, how do I enter your world? This is something that I really found that I learned along the way. I guess what I try to do is I try to observe what they're doing and then slowly try to find their spotlight. Whether that's imitation, because they love it. So you get your train and you're copying what they're doing or you're commenting on what they're doing. Oh yeah, spin, spin, spin. And then slowly trying to make that a little bit more functional. So now we're both spinning the wheels on the train and it's really, really fun. How do we step it up to the next step? How do we teach them how to play? I'm going to swing my train. Now you swing your train. Once you're in their spotlight, you've got their attention, they're giggling, they're lighting up in you. How can you use that to teach play and progress them along the way? I think another thing that is a little bit tricky to know is sometimes we expect self-regulation, and I'm big for that. Oh, it's packing away time and you don't want to. I need you to regulate yourself. But sometimes it's a big step. So when we're a baby, we kind of expect external regulation. I'm crying, mum, figure out what's wrong with me. Am I hungry? Do I need a nappy change? Things like that. Children and adults still expect the same thing sometimes. I know sometimes I wake up and I'm feeling really miserable and I expect people to know why, and I expect people to know how to fix it. The next one is kind of co-regulation, and this is, here's my problem, help me solve it. So this is where we're coming with them, we're labelling, oh, Oliver, I can see you're so upset about packing away today. I'm upset too. Let's take some deep breaths together and pack up the trains. You're really guiding them through that. Then there's that supported regulation where you're watching and you're giving those indirect cues. Oh, I love how you're taking a deep breath. Oh, I know you don't want to do that today, but I'm really happy that you are listening to me. Then we move on to that self-regulation, where we're just expecting to walk around the room and having them pack away there. Another part, another thing that I was lucky to attend is the circle of security. I don't know if you guys have heard of that one as well. Yeah, so that's a fantastic thing that I think it was a parenting program that started off, and it's got quite a long history, and it's really more of a reflective approach of getting us to think about our skills and our experiences and how that contributes to being a parent or how that contributes to being an educator. What I really love is that the early education system has really jumped on board, because I think the biggest thing to remember is sometimes you're the first attachment figure outside the home. So you're the next person that they're starting to attach to. You're their kind of mum for the day. So you need to help organise their world. And so I guess if we go through here, there's those two bits here where it is that secure base, where you kind of let them feel safe enough to go out and explore. And I guess when we think back, that's using our playful techniques. I'm here with you, I'm playing with you, I'm delighting that you're having lots of fun. But knowing that when they come back in, something's happened, they need you, that you are there with them, you're modelling how to calm down, you're being there, you're responsive, and you're listening there. So I think that's fantastic that it's starting to roll into that early childhood sector. And I think it's not something so scary. When I first heard of it, I was like, is this a new approach? Is this something I'm going to have to change? But I think it's just considering about, is our child, where does the child need me? Delighting in them, coming back in and helping them kind of co-regulate, or maybe even external regulate. Oh, sorry, I moved on. The last thing we'll talk about is a little bit about organising this space. So I guess with children on the spectrum, they can really lack skills in organisation and picking up on those cues. So how do we make our environment the most easy for them to follow? So there's things that we can do, like providing a range of activities. Don't be afraid to get their special interests out because of pure feeling that they're not going to transition. I think another one to be mindful is controlling access to materials. So if we know that trains is Oliver's thing and he hates morning tea because he's a picky eater, would we bring them out before morning tea? Or can we get him to work through the day and have them when there's a different transition? Maybe when mum comes to pick him up, he's quite happy to go. So could we use trains then? So he still has his activity, but we thought a little bit critically about how can we use that the best. Ensuring the environment is calming as possibly as it can be in early childhood. So looking at kind of noise and space, and also about clutter. I think that's a big thing that I learned for me, because when I first started, I wanted to have visuals and I wanted it to look beautiful. But knowing that sometimes it's okay to have white space and having some blank space, because some children really need that time to just go in a corner and not have too much going on there. And looking at the boundaries. So there's something called Teach that really talks about how do we structure that environment for kids on the spectrum. But really it's talking about how do we use the natural cues like bookshelves, like rugs, like visuals to kind of give those boundaries about when you're in this corner, I need you to stay in this corner. So this is the reading corner. How do I make it a kind of a cue to know that you need to stay in there? This is the eating area. How do I give you some cues that this is where I need you to sit down and eat today? And then we talked about visuals, which is great. So visuals to support appropriate behaviour, what you want them to do. Visuals to support emotional regulation. How do we show them that their engine's running a little bit too high, that their engine's running a little bit too low? How do we show them where to put the trains? Do we have visuals there? Do we make sure that it's really explicit? And how do we support those kids with communication difficulties? When they're even everyday communication activities, or when they're up in their red zone, or when they're up in that high zone, how do we support them to understand us as well as express themselves? And the last thing is sensory. How do we use some of the tools that we have here to create that nice environment? Do we have a corner for them to chill out? Is the outside the best space for them? What can we give them that doesn't become something too distracting? Or like the timers, that doesn't become a little bit of a weapon, because sometimes they can. So thinking about how do we use some strategies to help them kind of calm down and deregulate and things like that. Beautiful. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of a snapshot of some tips and tricks that you might have, or help you kind of change a little bit of your lens when we're looking at behaviour. Yeah.